Introduction. Whisky production is an ancient art that has been practiced for centuries. It is a complex process that requires a combination of science and artistry to produce a high-quality spirit. From the selection of the raw material to the maturation process, the production of whisky is a long and intricate journey that requires a deep understanding of the process. This information will provide a comprehensive overview of the production of whisky, from the early stages of preparation to the final stages of aging. Raw materials. The production of whisky begins with the selection of the raw materials. The primary ingredient in whisky is grain, which can include barley, rye, wheat, or corn. It is important to select the best quality grain for the production process, as it will have a direct impact on the flavor of the final product. Additionally, water and yeast are added to the grain in order to create the wort, which is the liquid that is used to create whisky. Once the raw materials are selected, the mashing process begins. During mashing, the grain is mixed with hot water and steeped for several hours in order to extract the sugars from the grain. This process is essential to producing a high-quality whisky, as it determines the flavor and character of the final product. Grain. The primary raw material used to make whisky is grain. This grain is usually malted barley, but can also include rye, corn or wheat. Yeast. Yeast is used for fermentation, which turns the sugar in the grains into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Water. Water is essential throughout the whisky making process. It is used for diluting the spirit, for soaking the grains and for cooling. Oak barrels. Oak barrels are used for aging and imparting flavor to the whisky. Bottles and caps. The whisky is then bottled and capped with a cork or screw-on cap. Fermentation. Once the sugars are extracted from the grain, the mash is moved to the fermentation tanks. Yeast is added to the mash and the sugars are converted into alcohol. This process can take several days or weeks, depending on the type of whisky being produced. Begin by mashing the grains. This is done by soaking the grains in hot water for a period of time, normally between 1 to 2 hours. The purpose of mashing is to break down the starches from the grains into fermentable sugars. After mashing, the resultant liquid, which is called wort, is transferred to a fermentation vessel. Yeast is then added to the wort, which begins the fermentation process. The yeast begins to consume the sugars in the wort and produces alcohol and carbon dioxide as a byproduct. During the fermentation process, the temperature of the liquid should be kept between 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. This is to ensure that the yeast remains active and is able to ferment the wort effectively. The fermentation process can take up to 2 weeks, depending on the type of yeast used. Once the fermentation process is complete, the wort is then transferred to a distillation vessel. Here, the alcohol is separated from the water and other solids by heating the mixture. The distilled liquid is then aged in oak barrels for a period of at least 3 years. During this time, the whisky undergoes a secondary fermentation process caused by the presence of specific bacteria and yeast found naturally in the wood of the barrel. As the whisky ages, the bacteria and yeast work to break down the sugars in the liquid, creating complex flavor compounds and contributing to the final flavor of the whisky. Distillation. The fermented mash is then distilled, which involves separating the alcohol from the liquid and other solid matter. During this process, the whisky is heated to a specific temperature, which turns the alcohol into vapor. The vapor is then cooled and condensed back into liquid form, which is referred to as the low wines. Whisky distillation is the process of producing whisky through the distillation of fermented grains. The skill of a whisky distiller lies in their ability to control the distillation process to produce a high-quality spirit with the desired characteristics. One of the most important skills for a whisky distiller is the ability to control the temperature during the distillation process. This involves monitoring the temperature of the still and making adjustments to the heat source as needed to maintain a consistent temperature. Too high of a temperature can result in a harsh, bitter spirit, while too low of a temperature can result in a weak, insipid spirit. Another important skill is the ability to control the flow of the distillate. This involves adjusting the valves and controlling the pressure within the still to ensure that the spirit is flowing at a steady rate. The distiller must also be able to make adjustments to the flow rate as needed to produce the desired flavor profile. The timing of the cuts is also crucial to the quality of the spirit. The distiller must be able to identify the different fractions of the distillate, such as the heads, hearts, and tails, and make cuts at the appropriate times to produce a balanced, flavorful spirit. The heads, which contain harsh and volatile compounds, are discarded, while the hearts, which contain the desirable flavors and aromas, are collected. The tails, which contain lower quality compounds, may be redistilled or discarded. Finally, a whiskey distiller must have a keen sense of taste and smell to be able to evaluate the quality of the spirit. They must be able to identify subtle nuances in flavor and aroma and make adjustments to the distillation process as needed to produce a high-quality spirit. Pot stills. Once the fermentation is complete, the mash is transferred to large copper pot stills. The stills are heated, and the alcohol vaporizes, rising to the top of the stills. The vapor is then condensed into a liquid in a condenser. Pot stills are the traditional method of distilling whiskey, and the process involves heating a mixture of fermented grains, known as wash, in a copper pot still, which causes the alcohol to evaporate. The vapors rise up through a swan neck and condense in a cooler, producing a liquid that is higher in alcohol content and has more flavor than the original wash. The skill of a pot stills distiller lies in their ability to control the temperature, timing, and other variables of the process to produce a high quality and consistent product. Here are some key skills that are required. Temperature control. The distiller must be able to carefully monitor and adjust the temperature of the wash as it is heated in the pot still. This requires a deep understanding of the chemical reactions that occur during the distillation process and how they are affected by temperature. Cut points. The distiller must be able to determine the exact moment at which to cut the heads, hearts, and tails of the distillate. This requires a keen sense of smell and taste, as well as a deep knowledge of the flavors and aromas associated with each part of the distillate. Equipment maintenance. The pot stills and associated equipment must be kept in good working order, with regular cleaning and maintenance. The distiller must be able to identify and fix any issues that may arise during the distillation process. Blending. Once the distillate has been produced, the distiller must be able to blend it with other whiskies to create a final product that is consistent in flavor and aroma. This requires a deep knowledge of the different types of whiskey and how they interact with each other. Double distillation. The Scottish whiskey tradition involves double distillation. The first distillation produces a liquid called low wines, which has an alcohol content of around 20 to 25%. The low wines are then distilled again in a second still, known as a spirit still, to produce a more concentrated spirit with an alcohol content of around 60 to 70%. Welcome to our show on the art and science of whiskey making. Today, we'll be exploring the fascinating world of double distillation, a key skill in producing high-quality whiskies. First, let's start with a brief overview of the whiskey making process. Whiskey is made from fermented grains, typically barley or rye, that are mashed and then distilled to increase their alcohol content. The resulting spirit is then aged in oak barrels to develop its distinctive flavors and aromas. But before the whiskey is aged, it must be distilled at least once, and often twice, to achieve the desired strength and purity. Double distillation, in particular, is a technique used by many Scottish and Irish whiskey producers to create a smooth and refined spirit. So, how does double distillation work? Let's walk through the process step by step. The first distillation, also known as the wash distillation, begins by heating the fermented mash in a large copper still. As the liquid boils, the alcohol vaporizes and rises up through a swan neck, where it is then cooled and condensed back into a liquid form. The resulting spirit, known as the low wine, typically has an alcohol content of around 25 to 30%. The low wine is then transferred to a second still, called the spirit still, for the second distillation. This still is smaller than the wash still and has a distinctive shape with a swan neck that curves downward. As the low wine is heated, the alcohol vaporizes once again and rises up through the swan neck, where it is condensed into a higher proof spirit. The resulting spirit, known as the new make, typically has an alcohol content of around 60 to 70%, depending on the specific distillery and style of whiskey being produced. This high-proof spirit is then transferred to oak barrels for aging, where it will develop its characteristic flavors and aromas over time. Now, let's talk about why double distillation is important in producing high-quality whiskies. By distilling the low wine a second time, the distiller is able to remove more impurities and create a more refined spirit. The second distillation also allows the distiller to select only the heart of the distillate, which contains the best flavors and aromas, while discarding the heads and tails that contain unwanted compounds. In addition, double distillation allows for greater consistency in the final product, as the distiller can adjust the cut points between the heads, hearts, and tails to achieve the desired flavor profile. Of course, not all whiskies are double distilled, and some producers prefer to use other techniques, such as triple distillation or column stills. However, double distillation remains a hallmark of many classic Scotch and Irish whiskies, and is widely regarded as an essential skill in producing high-quality spirits. So there you have it, a brief overview of the double distillation process in whiskey making. Whether you're a seasoned whiskey connoisseur or a newcomer to the world of spirits, we hope this has given you a new appreciation for the art and science of whiskey production. Cheers! The art of whiskey aging. After distillation, the whiskey is transferred to oak casks and left to age for several years. During this time, the whiskey takes on the flavors and colors of the oak casks, resulting in the unique taste and aroma of each whiskey. Aging whiskey is a delicate art. It requires patience, precision, and a deep understanding of the ingredients involved. Master distiller. When it comes to aging whiskey, the wood is just as important as the spirit itself. We use oak barrels that have been charred on the inside, which imparts a rich flavor and color to the whiskey. But the journey from raw wood to finished barrel is a long and laborious one. The wood must be carefully selected and seasoned, then cut, shaped, and toasted to exact specifications. Once the barrel is ready, we fill it with our carefully crafted whiskey and let it rest, developing complex notes of vanilla, caramel, and spice. The key to successful aging is knowing when to stop. We sample each barrel regularly to ensure that the whiskey is maturing at the right pace, and that the flavors are balanced. In the end, the art of whiskey aging is a balance between science and intuition, skill and patience. And the result is a rich and complex spirit that has been carefully crafted to perfection. Cheers to the art of whiskey aging. I hope this gives you an idea of what a script focusing on whiskey aging skills could look like. Let me know if you have any questions or if there's anything else I can help with. Blending. Finally, the whiskey is blended to achieve a consistent flavor profile. Different casks of whiskey are combined to create the desired flavor, and water is added to adjust the alcohol content. Overall, the distillation process is a critical step in the production of whiskey. It allows the alcohol to be separated from the fermented mash and concentrated to create a flavorful and aromatic spirit. Understanding the basics of whiskey blending. Before delving into the details of whiskey blending, it's essential to understand the basics of what blending is and why it's important. Blending is the process of combining different whiskies to create a new blend with a unique flavor profile. Blending is important because it allows whiskey makers to create a consistent product year after year. Types of whiskies used in blending. There are two main types of whiskies used in blending: single malt whiskey and grain whiskey. Single malt whiskey is made from 100% malted barley and distilled in a pot still. Grain whiskey, on the other hand, is made from a mixture of grains, such as corn, wheat, and barley, and distilled in a column still. Blending these two types of whiskies can create a unique and complex flavor profile. Blending. Finally, the whiskey is blended to achieve a consistent flavor profile. Different casks of whiskey are combined to create the desired flavor, and water is added to adjust the alcohol content. Overall, the distillation process is a critical step in the production of whiskey. It allows the alcohol to be separated from the fermented mash and concentrated to create a flavorful and aromatic spirit. Understanding the basics of whiskey blending. Before delving into the details of whiskey blending, it's essential to understand the basics of what blending is and why it's important. Blending is the process of combining different whiskies to create a new blend with a unique flavor profile. Blending is important because it allows whiskey makers to create a consistent product year after year. Types of whiskies used in blending. There are two main types of whiskies used in blending: single malt whiskey and grain whiskey. Single malt whiskey is made from 100% malted barley and distilled in a pot still. Grain whiskey, on the other hand, is made from a mixture of grains, such as corn, wheat, and barley, and distilled in a column still. Blending these two types of whiskies can create a unique and complex flavor profile. The art of blending. Whiskey blending is an art form that requires a lot of skill and expertise. The goal is to create a blend that is balanced, complex, and enjoyable to drink. A master blender will use their sense of taste and smell to identify different flavor notes in the whiskies they are blending and combine them in a way that creates a harmonious final product. Factors affecting blending. There are many factors that can affect the blending process, including the age, type, and quality of the whiskies being used. The blending process can also be affected by the casks used to mature the whiskies, as well as the environmental conditions in which they were stored. Blending techniques. There are several blending techniques used by whiskey makers, including vatted blending, where whiskies are blended before maturation, and cask blending, where whiskies are blended after maturation. There is also the concept of marrying, where a blend is left to rest for a period of time to allow the flavors to meld together. Popular blended whiskies. Some popular blended whiskies include Johnnie Walker, Chivas Regal, and Dewar's. Each of these blends has its own unique flavor profile, achieved through the use of specific whiskies and blending techniques. The blending process is usually carried out by a master blender, who carefully selects and combines different whiskies to achieve a desired flavor profile. Blending can also involve the addition of other ingredients, such as water or caramel coloring, to adjust the flavor or appearance of the whiskey. Blending is often done on a large scale, with hundreds or thousands of barrels of whiskey being combined to create a single batch. Whiskey bottling. Once the blending process is complete, the blended whiskey is transferred into large tanks or vats for maturation and conditioning. When the whiskey has reached the desired age and flavor profile, it is then transferred into bottles for distribution and sale. Bottling can be done either by hand or by machine, depending on the size of the operation. Before bottling, the whiskey is typically filtered to remove any sediment or impurities, and may also be chill filtered to improve clarity and prevent clouding when chilled. The bottles are then labeled and packaged for distribution. Overall, blending and bottling are crucial steps in the production of whiskey, as they allow for the creation of unique and distinctive flavors and the distribution of the finished product to consumers. Aging. Once the whiskey is bottled, it is placed in oak barrels and stored in a cool, dark place for several years. During this time, the whiskey develops its flavor and character as it interacts with the wood of the barrel. After the whiskey has been properly aged, it is ready to be bottled and enjoyed. Whiskey aging is a crucial step in the production of whiskey that greatly affects the final product's flavor, aroma, and color. Here are some details on the focus of whiskey aging. The process. Whiskey aging involves storing the distilled spirit in wooden barrels, where it matures over time. During the aging process, the whiskey interacts with the wood of the barrel, absorbing flavors and colors that give it its unique characteristics. Types of barrels. Whiskey can be aged in a variety of wooden barrels, including oak, sherry, bourbon, and wine barrels. Each type of barrel imparts its own unique flavors and aromas to the whiskey, depending on the wood's characteristics and the previous contents of the barrel. Time and environment. The length of time that whiskey is aged, as well as the environmental conditions of the aging process, can greatly affect the final product. Factors like temperature, humidity, and airflow all play a role in the aging process. Maturation and blending. After the whiskey has aged to the desired level, it is typically blended with other whiskies to achieve a consistent flavor profile. Maturation can also continue in the bottle, as the whiskey can continue to develop and change over time after it has been bottled. Flavor profile. The flavor profile of a whiskey can vary widely depending on the aging process. Some common flavors and aromas that can be imparted through aging include vanilla, caramel, oak, smoke, fruit, and spice. Overall, the process of whiskey aging is a complex and intricate one that requires careful attention to detail and a deep understanding of the science and art of whiskey making. The result is a rich and complex spirit that is beloved by connoisseurs and casual drinkers alike. Marketing. Whiskey producers must market their product to potential consumers. This can be done through advertising, social media, and promotional events. Whiskey producers must also ensure their product is available for sale in stores and online. Marketing is a crucial aspect of promoting any product, and whiskey is no exception. Here are some details on how to introduce a focus on whiskey marketing. Know your target audience. Understanding the preferences and interests of your target audience is critical in developing an effective whiskey marketing strategy. Research their demographic profile, lifestyle, and buying habits to create tailored messaging and promotions that resonate with them. Emphasize the brand story. Whiskey is a beverage that has been around for centuries and has a rich history and heritage. Telling the story of your brand, its origin, and how it is made can help you differentiate yourself from competitors and connect with consumers emotionally. Highlight the flavor profile. The flavor profile of whiskey is complex and diverse. Highlighting the unique taste, aroma, and finish of your whiskey can help you capture the attention of potential customers and persuade them to try it. Leverage digital marketing. In today's digital age, a strong online presence is essential for any brand. Utilize social media platforms, search engine optimization, SEO, and email marketing to reach a wider audience and build brand awareness. Partner with influencers. Collaborating with influencers can help you expand your reach and credibility with your target audience. Look for influencers who share your brand values and can showcase your whiskey in a compelling way. Host events and tastings. Hosting events and tastings is an excellent way to introduce your whiskey to potential customers and build brand loyalty. These events can be hosted in bars, restaurants, or even in store to create an immersive experience for attendees. Overall, effective whiskey marketing requires a deep understanding of your target audience, a compelling brand story, a focus on the unique flavors profile, a strong online presence, partnerships with influencers, and events and tastings to create a memorable experience for customers.